So I've dug myself into this hole, and I figure might as well keep digging. Hello and welcome back to Path of Exile 2 and my discussions about it. Of all the various games that I play on this channel, I've gotten the most hate on this one because I have serious disagreements with the way that these games go. Path of Exile 1 was established for a very long time. There's only really so much to say about it because, you know, it's been around and it's not going to change. Path of Exile 2, on the other hand, is still in early access, and it's supposed to be a drastically different game from the first one. That's kind of the whole point, right? It's supposed to be different from Path of Exile 1. So a lot of the more grindy and ridiculous things that I didn't really like in Path of Exile 1 are things that I'd like to see removed from Path of Exile 2. Now, all that said, this particular video is caused by a very specific comment that I received from somebody who claimed that I hadn't experienced 80% of the game at this point, even after 300 hours of gameplay. And I read that comment and I was like, that's an awfully outlandish claim to make for somebody who is up in the tier 12 maps and is, you know, working my way through towards the citadels. You know, I'm only a few tiers away from the citadels and, you know, potentially trying to fight the trying to fight the Arbiter of Ash. I know there's a few other bosses out there that, you know, Uber bosses you can fight. We'll talk about that in a second. But the idea that I've only experienced, that there's still 80% of the game that I haven't experienced yet, I was like, no, that's not even close to true. So I wanted to sit down and actually kind of figure it out a little bit. Sit down and look at the different activities that are available in the game and just kind of, you know, assign a, you know, somewhat arbitrary, but what I feel is close enough to kind of make my point. And that is that, you know, I've experienced quite a bit more content than this one person, and probably a lot of people who have a certain mindset about this game probably feel like I have. So I want to just go down this list really quick and kind of explain my thought process so that, you know, I can kind of rebut that statement and kind of make a point to those people who have a certain mindset that just because you think about the game a certain way doesn't invalidate the way other people think about games. And your way is no more right than my way, and you get to think about the game the way you want to, and I absolutely get to think about the game the way I want to. And if you feel the need to come into my comment section and leave a negative comment, please do so. When it comes to YouTube, engagement is engagement. View time is view time. Likes are likes. Dislikes are still engagement, and negative comments are still engagement. So all you're doing is helping me by coming in and trolling on my channel. So it's fine. Do what you're going to do. So all that said, I want to start off by saying a lot of people disregard the campaign as far as quantity of content. The problem with that is that the campaign takes up a significant amount of the time it takes for you to get your character from level 1 all the way up to whatever it is you're working towards, whether it's level 100 or you're just trying to experience in-game content. If you're like me and you're not a completionist and you're not worried about doing every last iota of things that there are to do in a game, where you're just trying to kind of do most of the mainstream stuff and then you're fine, the campaign is probably the vast majority of the time you're going to spend in the game. You're going to do a fair bit of the end game stuff and then you're just going to be done, because not everybody is interested in endlessly grinding the same thing over and over and over again just to accumulate wealth. If your goal in the game is just to accumulate wealth, well then okay, you could possibly make the argument that I'm missing out on 80% of the content because I'm just not putting in that amount of hours on one specific task. I disagree with that philosophy. I disagree with that viewpoint 100%. And that's just the way that it is. But even just being generous towards in the direction of people who think that the campaign isn't that big of a thing. Realistically, you're spending about 45% of your playtime just getting through the campaign, assuming you're not planning on endlessly grinding and grinding and grinding forever. Realistically, it's probably higher than that, but whatever. And another thing I want to add on top of that is that you also have to keep in mind that from a content perspective, just about everything that is in the end game of this game is basically just retreads of everything you went through in the campaign. There's very few new things in the end game maps. You're not going to come across anything new except for maybe a couple of the end game bosses. Everything else is just a more difficult repeat of things that you've already done. Even the Citadel bosses are just repeats of the act bosses that you fought in the campaign. So realistically, if your goal is not just endlessly farming currency, which I can't imagine is the goal of the majority of people who play games, the campaign is probably closer to 75 or 80% of the actual content in this game. It just is. But we'll ignore that for now and just say that if let's say our goal is to get all the way through the campaign, get all the way through the maps, and fight the Arbiter of Ash, which obviously I haven't done yet because I'm still at tier 12, that's fine. Even if that's your goal, I'm completely ignoring farming currency. I don't care about farming currency. If that's your goal in the game, if that's what you get your kicks on, that does not compute in my equation at all. I completely ignore you. But if you're just going from beginning of the game all the way up to the Arbiter of Ash, I'm going to say 45% of your time is probably going to be spent in the campaign, because once you get into the end game, you're going to be trying to breeze through the tiers, collect all the waystones you need, go collect the crisis shards that you need to go fight the Arbiter of Ash, and then go fight the Arbiter of Ash. Now, obviously, gear is going to play into that a little bit. You're going to have to farm some gear, but if you're doing the trade league, you can just buy the gear that you need, ideally, and then go fight him. I fought the Uber Pinnacle bosses. I fought some of the really high tier bosses in Path of Exile 1, and I didn't have to do endless farming to make it happen. So I'm assuming that the same thing can happen here. So obviously I'm making some assumptions, but I think it's valid. Now, Trial of the Sekimas and the Trials of Chaos are probably, I would say, 5% of your time if you're going to go do all of them to get all of the Ascendency points that you need. Mostly because if you're trying to do more than just the baseline level, you're probably going to have to do them several times to get them done, because they get harder and harder as you go, especially the Trial of the Sekimas. As you start adding more and more floors, realistically, you're probably going to fail a few times the first few times you go through, and it takes a while to get through them. So I gave it a generous 5%, just to say that, you know, for most people, they're not going to breeze through it the first time, and, you know, it's going to take you a little bit to get that done. So I've gotten half of the points I need for that. So I gave myself a generous 3%, just to say that, you know, I've done the Sekima's trial. I've done the Chaos trial. I got through most of what I needed to get the third tier of Ascendency points. But, you know, my judgment for having experienced content is having done the content, having tried the content. Completing the content, you can make the argument for that. I might listen to that. But realistically, I've experienced the Trial of the Sekimas, I've experienced the Trial of Chaos, and I'm not giving myself full credit for it because I haven't done it all the way through. It's fine. Same thing for the tier 1 to tier 15 maps. I'm up to tier 12 right now, as you can see on my screen, on the right side of the screen there. I'm almost done with tier 12, and I'm about to move into tier 13. So I gave myself a good, I'm saying that 20% of your time, if you're not just focused on farming and doing a bunch of craziness, like just getting through the maps and getting up through all of that stuff, is probably about 20% of your time on top of the time you spent on the campaign. The campaign takes a really long time to get through, unless you've been through it as many times as I have, and you're really just optimizing your pathway through that. Especially for a first-time player, they're going to spend a long time in the campaign. So you got to keep that in mind when you're trying to judge somebody on the amount of content that they've experienced. So I find that, you know, tier 1 to tier 15 maps probably doesn't take quite as long as maybe the campaign does, because all you have to do is just complete the number of maps that they ask you to do, get the maps, and then move on. Now, I personally kind of screwed myself as I was going through. I didn't optimize my suffixes the way I was supposed to make sure I was getting enough drops. So I'm artificially taking longer to get through it because I just didn't know any better, and now I do. So I'm trying to fix that now. But realistically, if you're using the proper strategy of just increasing your waystone drops, you're going to get enough waystones, you're going to breeze through the tiers, and you're going to get up there. So I feel like 20% is probably a reasonable number to assign to the amount of content, especially when you consider that absolutely everything in everything in the endgame maps is just retreads of the campaign. It's just retreads. There's nothing new in any of the maps. There's no new anything. Other than the other stuff we're going to talk about here, as far as the creatures you fight, the bosses that are available, any of that stuff, it's all the campaign stuff. The campaign is everything, basically, in this game. Hideouts, I gave a 1% because you just find those along the way. I have 3 out of the 4, but there's no way for me to put a 0.75% in here without making some... I think I could probably add some decimal points, but whatever. The point is that I pretty much got the hideouts that I want. That's all I'm really worried about. And then you have the 4 different league mechanics that are in there. I gave them an arbitrary 5% just because, you know, you could spend a fair bit of time doing breaches just to experience them a little bit, maybe farm them a little bit, but realistically, you're going to pick one of them and move on. So I gave 5% for each of them because I've done each of these league mechanics, and you would basically pick one and really focus on that, and that would be about 20% of your playtime, probably. So I haven't done any of the bosses, but for those of you who are going to say that the bosses should probably have a higher percentage, I disagree with you. Once you fight the boss once, you've experienced the content. Whether you beat the boss or not, that's a different story. Some people care about that. I really don't. I'm not even really worried about going after those bosses because I don't care. I just don't care. The gameplay, the bosses at the end of the game are the last things that you do. So trying to say that those are going to be a significant portion of the content, I just disagree with that philosophy. Most of the time you spend in the game is going to be getting to that. So realistically, you can only really assign them a very small percentage of the gameplay. That's what I'm going to say about that. Citadels and the Pinnacle boss, I gave another 5% because the Citadels are just going to be another map that you go do. You fight an in-game version of one of the campaign bosses. Realistically, I would say that still the Citadel should be all of this stuff. All of the maps and the Citadels should really be 0%. They should be lumped in with the campaign because it's all just campaign stuff that was retreaded for doing in-game content. You can try to claim that that's somehow different, but it's just really not. It's the same mechanics. I'm not getting anything new and interesting out of it other than they're just harder this time. That's not new. That's not different. That's not additional content. I don't think so. And then obviously there's the Pinnacle boss at the end. That's obviously very new. So out of all of this stuff on this list, the Breach boss, the Ritual boss, the Delirium boss, the Expedition boss, and the Pinnacle boss, that's the only really new stuff that you're going to experience in the end game. Those are the only new things you're going to come across in the end game. Everything else is just campaign retreads. So to the person who said to me that I still haven't experienced 80% of the content, sure, if your goal is to farm currency and make crazy amounts of wealth, or if your only goal is to get to these Delirium bosses, to get to these League bosses or the Pinnacle boss, if in your mind that's somehow 80% of the content, I challenge you to justify that. But if in your mind 80% of the game is just those Pinnacle bosses, we're too far apart on our definitions of what content is to have any kind of meaningful discussion. So I just wanted to say that because I think that, there's a couple of different viewpoints, and there's people that focus so hard on just the amount of grind that they do to accumulate wealth in the game, and I'm like, that's not why I play games. I don't play games to make fake money. Like, you can take your fake money, that's not going to do anything for you in the real world. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in experiencing new stuff, experiencing cool stuff, experiencing things that are worth my time to do them. And once you go through the campaign, you've pretty much done 90 to 95% of the content that is available in the game. Realistically, like, ignore my list over here, just realistically, you have done 95% of the content that's available in the game, because almost everything that comes after that is just retreads of the stuff you already did. There's nothing new in it. And even when the second half of the campaign comes out, all they're going to do is take the stuff from the second half of the campaign and add that as retreads into the end game as well. So realistically, to try to make the claim that most of the game is in the end game, that doesn't make any sense. Most of your time is probably going to be spent in the end game if your goal is primarily and only to farm currency so that you can get to the Pinnacle bosses and do that. But for me, I'm not willing to invest that amount of time to go fight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then once they introduce the last, I'm sure they'll introduce some more end-game bosses and stuff like that. But realistically, that's not my priority. My priority is enjoying new content, and there's just not a lot of new content. There's not a lot of new content. I don't understand the thought process of people who try to tell me that I haven't experienced most of the content, because I did. The campaign is almost all of the content. It just is. It just is. So that's my thought process on that. Obviously, like I said, my caveat is that these numbers are just arbitrary based off of how I kind of see the content in the game. And this is trying to be generous to those of you who think that the other stuff matters. And I just don't think so. I don't think it matters. I think that realistically, the top number needs to be 90%, and then everything else needs to be something less, something like 1 or 2% maybe. That's it. Because it's all just retreads of the same content. There's nothing new. There's no new mechanics. There's no new anything. It's all just the same stuff. I mean, you encounter expeditions during Do you encounter expeditions? I don't remember if you encounter expeditions during the campaign. Probably not. I don't remember. But regardless, the point I'm trying to make here is that almost all of the content is the campaign. That is the content. So I don't know what else to say about that. You're free to disagree. I encourage you to disagree because all you're doing is helping me. So flood my comment section with all the disagreements that you have, because you're not going to convince me. I've seen it for myself. I know what it is, and that's just how I think about it. And the fact that, you know, for the most part, my review videos tend to have a higher than 50% like to dislike ratio. I think enough people out there agree with me as well that I don't need to question my thought process on it. So thank you very much for watching. Be sure to click the like button, subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Join as a member for early access to videos, among other perks, or you can just leave YouTube's version of a tip with that thanks button. I also have PayPal and Patreon links in the description if you prefer to go outside of the YouTube economy to help out with channels. So that's all I got to say for today. Bring on the hate, and I'll see you for the next video.